Hello and welcome to SBK Edge Rush Extra. It's all about the extra as me and Tom Collins give you some edge for week 2 of the NFL. Tom, good to see you. Very brave choice wearing your Packers jersey after that week 1 performance. But who cares, right? Because the Packers got absolutely shellacked week 1 last season and Aaron Rodgers rolled on to another MVP season. So we don't want to pay too much attention to that.
No, exactly. I mean, last season against the Saints was even worse than against the Vikings in week 1. I believe in the Packers. I believe in Aaron Rodgers. Hopefully, we'll be much better this week against the Bears.
Now, you mentioned on the show last week you used to play a bit of football. Has anyone ever given you the look that Aaron Rodgers gave Christian Watson after that drop?
Oh, I'll tell you what, I've done exactly the same as Christian Watson did on that long bomb, but there was literally no one around me, not within 10 yards. I went back to the huddle. It was arguably the worst moment of my life. Immediately got subbed off. It was terrible. So, look, I feel for Christian Watson, but at the same time, you've got to make that play.
Oh, yeah, big time. And things are looking up, though, for you, Tom, and I think might be looking up for Watson this week. We'll talk about Bears-Packers in a bit. We're going to look at Seahawks-49ers as well, but we're going to lead off with the Bucs-Saints game, which is fascinating for all kinds of reasons. These two are clear contenders for some action in the playoffs this season. The Bucs went into the season very much expected to be. The Saints, I think, were a kind of hipster dark horse pick that things could be coming together very nicely. What's particularly intriguing about this game, of course, is that in recent years, in the Brady Tampa era, to the most part, the Saints have had Brady's card marked. They've had a lot of success against this Bucs side over the last couple of years in the regular season. What has been the key to that? Why do you feel the Saints have had success against the Bucs when so many other teams haven't?
I mean, it's been good coaching by Sean Payton, but also the Drew Brees factor. I think we can't overlook that. Obviously, the Saints are now without Brees. He's retired and Jameis Winston's at the helm. But Drew Brees had the edge on Tom Brady. He was the only quarterback, in my opinion, that actually had that throughout the regular season when they were facing off against one another. They're 5-5 when they face the Saints and Brady. I think Brady's going to have the edge again this week with Jameis Winston now leading the Saints. But, it's going to be a very close matchup.
No Sean Payton as well, of course, which is it's interesting to see just how far they'll go under Dennis Allen. One of the big issues has been, and the concerns with the Bucs going into the season has been that the changes in their offensive line, the protection for Brady. They've definitely depleted year on year, but still, to the most part, I think people feel it's a strong enough unit. But Donovan Smith hyperextended. You don't want to hyperextend anything. It's certainly not your elbow if you're an offensive lineman against the Cowboys. You're going to keep an eye on him. It could be without Chris Godwin as well, one of his key weapons offensively. So Brady will be, relatively speaking, short stacked up against a formidable Saints front. So do you think that the Saints can get the edge in the trenches?
I think they can, but at the same time, this is Tom Brady and this is the Bucs. Tom Brady overcomes adversity all the time. As you say, that wide receiver room looks pretty thin right now. Russell Gage injured, Chris Godwin, as you mentioned, already out. Julio Jones was on the injury report. So was Mike Evans. Those two should play, I imagine, on Sunday. But the Bucs are 2.5 points favorite in this matchup. If you want to look at the money line, they're around 46 fractional odds, 1.7 decimal odds, and minus 143 American odds. So they're still favorites to get the job done. But as you mentioned, this is going to be a tough matchup. There's some injuries on their team. So, they're going to have to put up probably more points than they put up against the Cowboys last Sunday.
It's a super fast Bucs defense. I mean, this is very much a prime Bucs defense that is so balanced, so rounded, and the speed is going to be integral against the Saints offense that is very much on point with the return, the reemergence of can't guard Michael Thomas back in business after injury and extended absence from the NFL. Back-to-back touchdowns for him in the Saints Week 1 game. They've got Olave in the mix, of course, Kamara. I mean, this is a team that is stacked with talent, but Jameis is a player and a concern, of course, because we know he's got an arm. We know he can flex when he needs to, but he can be very fast and loose with the ball. So the Bucs will look to exploit that, won't they? Get in his face, force him to make errant decisions.
Yeah, we've seen before Jameis Winston, with the Bucs especially, was making plenty of errors that would lead to turnovers and then the opposition having short field to basically play with and rack up some points. Jameis Winston picked up a little back injury last Sunday. That offense looks really good, the Saints. I think they'll put up points against the Bucs, much more than the 3 that the Dallas Cowboys put up last week. But I think there will be a few turnovers in here, going the way of Tampa. Maybe there's a few goal-to-go opportunities. And that's where my anytime touchdown scorer comes in here. I like Rashard White. Now, this guy's probably been overlooked. Everyone's thinking, Leonard Fournette, the lead running back at the Bucs. And yeah, I think Fournette will have a big day. He did in week 1. But Rashard White had 8 touches of the ball, which I think is a pretty promising start in the first NFL game of his career. I loved him at Arizona State last year in college. played 11 games, scored 15 touchdowns, over 1,000 total yards. I think Rashard White is a sleeper in this first game for an anytime touchdown scorer.
Oh, love that. Love that. The Jameis Revenge Bowl, of course, because Jameis shouted out of town for Brady. I mean, let's face it, pretty much every quarterback ever would be shown the door for Brady. But yeah, I wonder if Winston has revenge on his mind. Doesn't always work out that way, of course, as Baker. So close, but no cigar week one. Poor Baker. I'm sure he'll bounce back. Speaking of bounce backs, let's talk Seahawks 49ers because the 49ers absolutely need that after a very difficult week one. Difficult for all kinds of reasons, not least ridiculous conditions in Chicago, which as James Sandrini on our FFS show over on the Nat Coombs show podcast feed described as like playing in a water park, which I think incidentally is a great shout for the Pro Bowl. I think we should start to consider that as maybe a fourth quarter dimension for the Pro Bowl to make that a bit more compelling. So we can't judge too much in particular with Trey Lance and this 49ers offense based on what we saw in trying conditions. But what were your takeaways looking at Trey Lance and marshalling this offense week one? Are you very much in the camp that you saw enough to validate the Shanahan faith and that he's going to be fine? Or are you part of this camp that's saying, I'm really, really concerned, thank God we've got Jimmy G in the wings because come week 6, we're probably going to need him?
Yeah, I think the jury's out a little bit. Jimmy G, obviously sitting on the bench, is fantastic acquisition for the 49ers, fantastic moving forward, just in case Trey Lance doesn't perform as expected. Prior to that game against the Bears, I was a big Trey Lance fan because I drafted him in a couple of my fantasy leagues.
Smart.
Unfortunately, week one didn't go to plan, but as you mentioned, that weather was horrendous. Reminds me of a time when I played in Wales for my previous American football team, and it was the worst conditions you will ever see. Couldn't feel my fingers after the first minute. The floor, the surface was horrific. Ice. It was kind of the same there. Yeah, basically. And the 49ers threw away a 10-point lead.
Did you get on better or worse? Okay, all right, we'll move fast on that. So yeah, they threw it away, and threw it away is exactly right. They were fast and loose, ill-disciplined, and that's out of everything. I think what will have frustrated Shanahan the most, really, just how many unnecessary penalties they were, how half on half defensively they looked altogether different. And let's face it, this Bears offense, and I thought Fields looked good, but this Bears offense, particularly in those conditions, not exactly amongst the more formidable in the NFL right now. But the 49ers let them back in the game. The Seahawks, in contrast, of course, had a very successful week. A couple of things on this. First of all, what did he make of the reaction that Russell Wilson got? Because I get it. He's left. He's no longer part of your crew. He's part of their crew. So you're not exactly going to be writing in poetry and serenading him all game long. I expected the 12th man to be vocal once the game was rolling, but the initial response that he got was pretty jarring, wasn't it? Are you frustrated or disappointed to see that from the Seahawks? Do you think that's fair game? You think that, look, Seahawks Nation, he's gone now? I thought it was a little bit disrespectful.
Yeah, I think it was a little bit disrespectful given what Russell Wilson has done for the Seahawks over the years. You know, he's taken them to playoff games, etc., when they probably shouldn't have been at that stage. He's been a fantastic player for Seattle. And
10 years and won him a Super Bowl. Yeah, exactly.
I know, exactly. And Pete Carroll and him had a fantastic connection, yet prior to the game, they didn't speak one word to each other. It was fantastic to see, but also a little bit disrespectful. Maybe it got into Russell Wilson's head because the Broncos lost and the Seahawks won.
Well, maybe the 12th man knows more than I do about it. Speaking of interactions between quarterbacks and head coaches, not quite exactly the same, but interactions post-game or pre-game. Did you see the McDaniel-Belichick post-game handshake? It was, you think go and look it up. I'm obsessing. I'm just watching it on a loop. McDaniel going over to Belichick and just going through their respective minds as they were walking away. But the Seahawks, yeah, as Gino said, Gino dropping one of the greatest lines in the history of post-match interviews, and very much demonstrable with the Seahawks side that everybody had written off. They'd written him off as well, but they lock in the first win of the season. And this is a decent landing spot for them based on what we saw with the 49ers last week. So where are you leaning on this one, Tom?
Yeah, I think that was a huge shock against the Broncos. The Broncos are one of my favorite plays and supposed to the Super Bowl this year. So I think that was a big performance from Seattle. But at the same time, I don't think it was a true reflection of the game. Broncos had 180 total yards on offense, more than Seahawks. So I think the Broncos were the best team. Poor decisions let them down. The 49ers are 9.5 points favorite in this matchup against the Seahawks this week, 1.29 on the decimal on money line. So they're a big favourites, an overwhelming favourites. Look, I'm not a believer in the Seahawks. I think it was a one-off performance. I think the Broncos were the best, just didn't perform at their best that day. I'm taking the 49ers on the spread, minus 9.5 here to bounce back even without Eli Mitchell.
Yeah, that's the big loss for them, isn't it? Offensively, Eli Mitchell. But I guess that will mean Debo will be seeing even more action than usual. And of course, Debo, one of the more versatile weapons in the NFL right now, lines up pretty much anywhere and takes care of business. So you like the 49ers heavily there. What about Bears-Packers final game? Now, remember, Tom, we've talked about this before. I just want to reiterate it. You got to take personal interest and passion, everything else out of it. Strictly business, strictly journalistic nuance and balance, right? To bear all that in mind. The Bears, well, they're going to come into this with their tails up after last week, of course. And another team, much like the Seahawks, that nobody had a huge amount of optimism for going into the season, but solid. A lot to like about Fields, a fair amount to like about the defense as well, to be fair. And the Packers wounded after that week one shellacking. So which way do you see this one go?
Well, the Packers are 9.5 points favourites, much like the 49ers are against the Seahawks. I think that spread's a bit optimistic. We didn't see much from the offense in week one against the Vikings. We only scored 7 points. I think we're going to see plenty more of Aaron Jones, and I'll come to him in a minute. AJ Dillon as well. I think we're going to run the ball a fair amount. I expect us to bounce back. If you ask me in my power rankings pre-week one, the Seahawks and the Bears would be my bottom two sides in the power rankings. I think they both overperformed, but at the same time, I think they were helped by conditions in their opening game. I really do expect the Packers to bounce back. And one stat I do want to mention is the overall rivalry between the Packers and the Bears. I have to mention this on the pod. Wearing the Packers shirt, Packers are 103 for 95 with 6 ties. We boast the winning percentage in this rivalry. Hopefully we get another one on the board here now.
That's one of my favorite things when you're looking at analyzing and which action you're going to take and games to take is when you wheel out historic stats, particularly stats that span back over decades and decades. But I love it when you say, this team or, Coach Carroll is 7-1 against, talking about teams that with players that have retired from the NFL years ago. Like that's relevant for this matchup. We'll go with it. Just quickly on, as you're, so tied in and invested in the Packers, question that we talked about on last week's show, a question that many people have discussed going into the season. The Packers undoubtedly stacked defensively, one of the great quarterbacks of their generation. You've mentioned that solid ground game they have, but with Devontae going, this was always the concern that do they have the receiving core that's strong enough, or does that not matter, or is that much less significant when you're dealing with a player like Aaron Rodgers, who will just weave gold out of anything? And let's not get carried away with what happened week one, particularly because they are rookie receivers and they will bounce back. Shane Vereen, incidentally, brilliant over on the Nat Coombs show earlier this week, Super Bowl winner, when we were talking to him about the kind of reaction that Watson would get from the vets in the locker room after that. I said, presumably they just put their arm around him, G him up. He's a rookie. It's a tough break. It's prime time. And he laughed and said, yeah, I think it's going to be a slightly different reaction to it. Tough love. And that's the key, though, with this young receiving core, they will get in sync, particularly with Rodgers around them. So are you still optimistic that this is a deep run playoff side, or are you a bit concerned that actually seeing it in Technicolor, this young receiving core, how raw it is, you're thinking, okay, fine, we might get to 11-6, we'll make the playoffs, but we're going to struggle up against some of the heavyweight teams there?
I think probably the latter. I think I'm not as confident this year as I would have been last year or the year before when we had Devontae. We had that safety blanket for Aaron to always look to. We don't have a playing receiver this year that's going to get 13, 15 targets a game and just dominate, even if he's double covered. I think we're going to improve. I expect us to rack up a fair amount of wins and maybe even win division. I think Vikings are actually a big player in divisional market, especially with Justin Jefferson. I mean, he averaged 4 yards of separation against us. That is ridiculous. We need to cover a lot better against the Bears this week. I think we will. I think we'll win this game. And as I mentioned, I think Aaron Jones is going to be the key. Maybe the receivers don't have the full trust of Rodgers yet. Aaron Jones does. He'll line up as receiver a few times. He'll take a couple of screens, maybe a few slants and hitches. And Aaron Jones could be the key here. I think for first touchdown scoring, he'll be my play. He scored 4 touchdowns in the last 3 meetings between these two sides. So I think that the trends are on his side. Aaron Rodgers is on his side. And everyone thinks that Aaron Jones is the safety blanket here. He didn't get many touches last week. AJ Dillon actually carried the rock plenty more than Jones did. But I think this week we'll see a much bigger workload for him.
Reverting to type, I think, is the narrative and the moral of that story. 3 terrific games, all, of course, live on Sky Sports over in the UK. There's plenty more football chat over on the Nat Coombs Show podcast, including SBK, Edge Rush. We key in on a lot more action over the course of week 2. So make sure you lock in for that. And a reminder that for all new SBK customers, you'll get £30 in free bets by depositing £10. T and C's apply. Right. Go and wash that Packers jersey ready for Sunday, Tom Collins, and get yourself set. Great work. We'll check in with you very soon.
Thank you very much, Nat.